The expulsion of 23 Russian diplomats is only the start of it. The UK Prime Minister promising more retaliation against Moscow, holding the Kremlin responsible for the unleashing of a military-grade nerve agent that's landed a former Russian double agent and his daughter in critical condition. How far should Theresa May go? How far can she go? Will May have the backing of Donald Trump and her European neighbors? May was Home Secretary back in 2006 when another former Russian spy was poisoned in central London. Lacing a cup of tea with polonium was bad enough. This time it's up to 500 people who may have been exposed to the poison that landed one police officer in hospital and contaminated at least 21 others. How will Russia respond? For starters, Moscow denies in what's just the latest chapter in a long saga. Over the years, London's been a favorite destination for oligarchs, dissidents, some of whom have met unfortunate ends on British soil. Finally, the timing. We'll be asking our panel, why now? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at poisoned relations. And with us from Strasbourg, Sajjad Karim, British Conservative member of the European Parliament. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
From Edinburgh in Scotland, Michelle Carlin, lecturer in forensic chemistry at Northumbria University. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Welcome back to journalist Dimitri Dikoshko, who joins us. Nice to see you. And from the Latvian capital, Riga, Gordon Hahn of risk consultants Core Analytics, author of Ukraine Over the Edge, Russia, the West, and the New Cold War. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. She addressed the House of Commons earlier, Theresa May announcing the expulsion of diplomats, the freezing of Russian state assets. No royals will go to the World Cup. This after triggering a meeting of the UN Security Council.
Mr. Speaker, this was not just an act of attempted murder in Salisbury, nor just an act against the UK. It is an affront to the prohibition on the use of chemical weapons, and it is an affront to the rules-based system on which we and our international partners depend. We will work with our allies and partners to confront such actions wherever they threaten our security at home and abroad.
Sajjad Karim, was this the response you were expecting?
Very much so. I expected the British Prime Minister, as I would expect any European Union member state Prime Minister, to react in a very clear way, setting out that this was an attack upon a value-based system that adheres to the rule of law. So in that sense, it was entirely appropriate, and it's good to know that the entirety of the European Union stands alongside the British Prime Minister at this moment in time, and indeed it is now essential that the United Nations follows in adhering to and setting out a very clear statement that the international legal norms will be enforced.
International legal norms that will be enforced. Dimitri Dikoshko, your thoughts on what you just heard from the British Prime Minister?
In fact, my question is, what does the British Prime Minister and the British government want? Because, of course, it is, in fact, a ridiculous accusation against Moscow. Why should Russians kill such a man, which had no importance at all, whom they could have killed 7 years ago when he was in jail, and nobody would have known about that? Why should they poison his daughter, who is living in Russia and working in Russia? There is no proof at all of anything. The inquiry is not finished, and the accusations are very high, and they do not want to associate the Russians who are offering to cooperate, to know what the Novichok poison is, because they say they can determine where from it is coming. All the former countries of the USSR had this kind of poison, which is no more produced in Russia. Russia says they have no even stocks of this poison. Well, I don't understand what does Britain want.
All right, let's get our other two panelists to perhaps respond. First of all, to the technical side of your criticism, which is sharing the proof. What proof is there? Michelle Carlin, what do you understand about Novichok, and what is your response to what you just heard from Dmitry Dikoshko?
Novichok agents are nerve agents. We know they've been around since the 70s and 80s, but very little is known about the actual science and also where they've originated from. We do know that they were manufactured in the 70s and 80s in the former Soviet Union, but where they're being manufactured now, we don't know.
Military teams were emphatic that it was Novichok. How would they know for certain?
Novichok are a series of nerve agents. They're what we class as the most newest, so fourth generation nerve agents. They are supposedly more toxic than the V agents, such as VX. But again, obviously, there is not as much known about these Novichok agents as there is about the others, such as sarin or Soman.
Do you, when you hear Dmitry Dikoshko say that they should have shared more of the evidence with the Russians, what do you think is going on right now?
Obviously, I'm only speaking about it from a scientific perspective and from my perception of that, from what we've heard from the media. As far as sharing information goes with Russia, I understand that Russia has asked for an example of the Novichok agent that has reportedly been detected.
Gordon Hahn, your thoughts, and you heard Dmitry Dikoshko say, why would they kill Sergei, or try to kill Sergei Skripal at this particular point in time?
Well, one problem is the use of the term they, for example. There's a tendency in the West, every time something happens involving Russians, that means Russia did it and Putin ordered it. And that's not necessarily the case. If you go back and look, I've been recently doing some research on Putin's quote-unquote first killing. He's charged in many places in the West and by Russian liberals' intelligentsia for having killed his mentor, the Democratic mayor of St. Petersburg, with whom he worked for 6 years, and with whom he was preparing to appoint, according to the former mayor himself, his wife, his daughter, and people who were with him in exile in Paris after Putin helped him escape to Paris, escaping hardliners in the regime, that he was going to receive a high post in the Putin government. Within days, Sobchak was killed. Coroners claimed he died of a heart attack. And this murder remains a mystery. But the question is, why would Putin kill his closest friend, his closest associate, who was planning to appoint to a post? So there are a lot of murky things. I would suggest that everyone take a step back and understand that in the world of intelligence, smoke, mirrors, double agents, the most obvious explanation isn't always the correct explanation. There are a lot of rogue elements, semi-attached or attached to the Kremlin, that Putin doesn't necessarily have control of. That doesn't mean that we should exclude 100% that Putin may have ordered this operation. Seems unlikely to me, but I would like to keep an open mind. And I understand why Theresa May has had to take steps in the present atmosphere. She absolutely had to take some kind of steps. And in any case, when something like this happens with a foreign national, with a regime that has then done some pretty dastardly things over the years, it makes sense that she had to do something. I would have suggested that she do the diplomatic move first, and then hold off till there's more evidence to present, and then up the ante, depending on the strength of that evidence. But she's acted the way she's acted, and we'll see what that leads to.
Sajjad Karim, did Theresa May act a little hastily? She made that initial statement on Monday saying Russia had until Tuesday midnight to come up with answers, otherwise it would be held responsible. 36 hours, a little too short?
We provided ample opportunity to Mr. Putin and to Russia to clarify the position based upon two grounds. One, was Russia responsible for this? And if not, to provide an explanation as to how it is that this nerve agent could have been used in this particular way on the soil of the United Kingdom. Having had that opportunity, Russia singularly failed to do so, but in fact adopted a policy of deflection. Now, we have therefore then been left with no choice whatsoever but to act in British and United Kingdom interests based upon the fact that not only was a British citizen directly attacked, but that the attack took place on British soil, and therefore we have taken a very clear stance on this. And in fact, it is not the actions of a state that does not have confidence in the evidence that it has before it that it is taking matters to an international fora. We are very encouraged by the fact that the European Union has said that they are willing to place this on the Council's agenda for discussion next week, and we ourselves, as a British government, have asked for the matter to be raised at the United Nations level as well. Now, those are the actions of a state that believes in a rules-based system and has confidence in the evidence before it.
But do you take Gordon Hahn's point that it may not be
that is being adopted by Russia and Mr. Putin?
Do you take Gordon Hahn's point that it may come from Russia, but may not be under the orders directly of Vladimir Putin?
Well, this was a point that we provided ample opportunity for Russia to make. Rather than do that, Russia simply has tried to behave in a manner that is to try and deflect away from dealing with the issue. Now Russia is going to have to deal with the issue at a UN level.
2 days ago, the leader of the UK's opposition called for a response that should be, quote, focused on reducing conflicts and tension rather than increasing them. Left-wing Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn drawing boos from not just Conservatives when he showed the same caution earlier in the House of Commons.
And has the Prime Minister taken the necessary steps under the Chemical Weapons Convention to make a formal request for evidence from the Russian government under Article 9.2? How has she responded to the Russian government's request for a sample of the agent used in the Salisbury attack to run its own tests?
Michelle Carlin, your reaction to what you just heard?
Obviously, if they have requested a sample, it's how exactly you would get it there for them to be able to analyse it. Obviously, it's quite dangerous in whatever form they have it. Obviously, we don't know how they've stored it, so what state it's currently in, we don't know.
So are these legitimate questions on the part of Jeremy Corbyn, or is he giving Vladimir Putin a free pass?
I'm not a politician, but obviously, as part of the Chemical Weapons Treaty, it is possible for them to ask for evidence.
It is not only political, it is also juridical, because Russian ask a sample because a Russian citizen, daughter of the former double agent, was victim of this poison. So they ask that by the rules of the consulate, and they ask what a sample of this poison.
Sajjad Karim, your thoughts on what Jeremy Corbyn said and what Dmitry Dikochko's point is?
Well, I had the opportunity actually to sit in a debate in the European Parliament where I saw many a Russian apologist rising in order to try and deflect attention. And what was most interesting was Putin admirers remaining silent and out of the chamber and completely silent in the international media as well. Now, we know who his people are throughout the European Union. And what was most interesting here is deflection from Moscow, deflection from Russian apologists, but complete silence from Putin admirers, whilst at the same time failing to address the very real issue of providing an explanation. Now, this simply is not good enough. This has now got to go to a United Nations level. That is what the United Kingdom has itself called for, and that is a proper arena in which Russia, having completely tried to sideball the United Kingdom, is now going to have to face a rule-based system at an international level.
And are you suggesting,
I don't believe it is going to be able to do this.
Are you suggesting, Sajjad Karim, that Jeremy Corbyn is a Putin apologist?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn's performance from the floor of the House has caused so much consternation and concern from his own Labour Party members of Parliament. Far be it for somebody like me to raise questions. His own side are raising questions today.
Dimitri. From the empty accusations, as usual, I would say it would be more serious to discuss of our European interests for the relationship with Russia and not try to make this kind of provocation as it is done just now for I don't know which purpose.
We're talking about a chemical nerve agent that may have exposed up to 500 people.
You know, so I think this kind of operation is also against Europe and against European interests.
All right, we're going to pick up
because
on this
now we have big problems, and I think it occurs not.
We're going to pick up on these points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day when UK Prime Minister Theresa May has unveiled a set of sanctions against Russia, most notably the biggest expulsion of diplomats in nearly 3 decades, 23 to be booted out of Britain. We're talking about in the company of Sajjad Karim, British Conservative member of the European Parliament, who joins us from Strasbourg. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Michelle Carlin, a lecturer in forensic chemistry at Northumbria University. Journalist Dimitri Dekochko is with us, as is from the Latvian capital, Riga, Gordon Hahn of Risk Consultants, Core Analytics. Thank you all. The UK government, by the way, has also promised, in the wake of the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, to reopen at least 14 cold cases of mysterious deaths that the website BuzzFeed reported on last year, cases that had been closed by the UK government. It's too early to say whether the updated tally should be 15. What with the sudden death Tuesday of 68-year-old former Russian senior executive Nikolai Glushkov, linked to the late Kremlin opponent Boris Berezovsky, who was found dead in March 2013 with a scarf tied around his neck in the bathroom of his mansion. It had been ruled a suicide at the time. Eric Ngunke has more.
Great Britain is becoming an increasingly dangerous place of exile for former Russian agents and critics of Vladimir Putin. The poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia is just the latest in a string of suspicious deaths or attempts at the lives of high-profile Russians in the United Kingdom. In 2006, images of Alexander Litvinenko, bald and frail due to exposure to a radioactive substance, splashed headlines across the world. The former KGB agent and Putin critic, who had fled Britain, died weeks after his green tea was spiked with highly radioactive polonium. While he was still on his deathbed, he blamed Vladimir Putin for his eventual fate. While Russian officials denied the accusations, a British inquiry concluded that Vladimir Putin likely approved Litvinenko's assassination. Alexander Peropolichny would be next. The 44-year-old businessman turned whistleblower exposed the involvement of Russian tax officials in an extensive money laundering scheme. While he died of what appeared to be natural causes, traces of a rare plant poison were later found in his stomach. In 2017, new evidence suggested he may have ingested poisoned soup shortly before he died, though police later said they were unable to confirm the suspicion. Just 1 year later, Russian businessman Boris Berezovsky was found dead in his Western London home. Once known as the godfather of the Kremlin, he fled to the United Kingdom, where he was granted political asylum after a spat with Vladimir Putin. A fierce critic of the Russian president, he made numerous enemies. But the coroner in his case was unable to determine whether he was murdered or committed suicide. And the saga continues. Just days after Sergei Skripal's poisoning, British counterterrorism police are investigating the suspicious death of Nikolai Glushkov. a Russian exile and former associate of Boris Berezovsky.
Michelle Carlin, it's tough to say with these 14 deaths. They're suspicious in some cases, or in a lot of cases. In any case, the Home Secretary is going to reopen all of them. As somebody who works in forensics, what would you look for?
Well, they would be opening the investigation to establish, obviously, if the cause of death was true, as in is there other aspects that they've either missed or that they should have looked into. I don't know enough about all of the other cases, but I'm assuming it would be a review of the paperwork that they have.
Sajjad Karim, a lot of criticism in that BuzzFeed profile investigation of the UK government, effectively accused by the journalists of sweeping some of those cases under the rug, even while US intelligence officials had told them, hey, some of these deaths are suspicious.
I think it's essential that actually we, as a country today, carry out a very thorough review of any such instances that have come to light or taken place on the soil of the United Kingdom. This is 14 that we have had brought to light, and Amber Rudd has quite rightly come to the conclusion that we must revisit all of these situations, and I suspect there will actually be more, and it is essential that we carry out a very thorough investigation in relation to these 14 cases and any others that may need a review as well.
Gordon Hahn, your thoughts on the relationship, the symbiotic relationship, if you will, between London and Moscow, and your thoughts on these 14 and possibly, but again, we have no proof of it yet, 15 with this latest death?
Well, if you look at some of the cases, for example, the Litvinenko case and the Berezovsky case are intimately tied. It's important to remember, going back to what I was talking about before, with the connections between either rogue elements in the Russian intelligence services or acting elements in the Russian intelligence service with criminal organizations, that Berezovsky had a long record, a criminal record in Russia before Putin ran him out of the country. I would suggest to Theresa May, when they do this review of the 14 murders, that they look very closely at that sort of mock trial that was done that came to a conclusion that Putin had ordered the Litvinenko murder, to take a look at the testimony of one of the people in that trial, mentioning the fact that Berezovsky and Litvinenko were dealing with Chechens and had actually facilitated information to Chechens on how to build a nuclear weapon. The polonium that supposedly that killed Litvinenko polonium can be used to build a trigger for a nuclear weapon. So one wonders whether Kovtun and I forget the other Russian's name who were involved with Litvinenko weren't, along with Berezovsky, attempting to run weapons and know-how to the Chechens to build a nuclear weapon, which the Chechens may have been willing to pass on to Al-Qaeda. And that might be something to check out as well, besides looking at the single track of whether Putin ordered the assassination. Because, again, this is the world of espionage, black markets, all sorts of hazy, murky stuff, and jumping to conclusions isn't a smart move. I'll just point to one other fact very quickly. The situation in Ukraine. The so-called snipers massacre that occurred on 20 February 2014, we've been told by all the Western governments that was undertaken by President Yanukovych, ordered by President Yanukovych. The American ambassador to Ukraine implied that it was a Russian-led operation. Now we know for a fact that it was an operation carried out by ultra-nationalist fascists who were among, not the entire group, but among the Maidan demonstrators who shot at both sides. They've given interviews to this effect. New evidence has been revealed during the trial of the Berkut. So not everything is as it seems. We need to be careful.
Dmitry Dukochko, this was one of the things raised when there was the assassination in Moscow of Boris Nemtsov, that this seemed to a lot of people like it may not have been ordered by Putin. Are intelligence services out of control in Russia?
And you think that if Putin had ordered to kill Nemtsov, who was not very dangerous, you know?
Exactly. So my question to you is,
he would have ordered to kill him in front of the Kremlin, so all the plans of the cameras would show always the Kremlin.
Does that mean there are rogue elements in his services? Does that mean there are rogue elements that he doesn't control?
No, because I don't know who killed Nemtsov and why. You know that Nemtsov, who was during the Yeltsin years a very brilliant political man, and who was a former prime minister, well, nearly prime minister, has become a businessman afterwards. And so he was linked with Ukraine.
Right, but in the case...
And I'm not sure
You're not sure who. NATO, by the way, has put out a communique saying it's expressing deep concern at what it calls the first offensive use of a nerve agent on alliance territory since it was founded in 1949. Brexit or no Brexit, that's a concern echoed this Wednesday by the President of the European Council.
At a time when someone on the outside spreads fake news, meddles in our elections, and attacks people on our soil with the use of a nerve agent, the response must not be transatlantic bickering, but transatlantic unity.
So at the time when someone on the outside spreads fake news, meddles in our election, attacks people on our soil, it's clear to Donald Tusk that Russia is responsible. Your reaction, Dmitry Dukochko?
No, all these cases you have mentioned about London, even in the case of Litvinenko, there was no evidence found. There were two men who were accused, Russian spies, and even against them there were no evidence found. So it's a plot against
Moscow is what you're saying.
Then, look, you know, you remember Captain Baril, who was a gendarmerie officer for Mitterrand. In this Irish affair, he was mixed.
Right, but that's a completely different case.
No, it is not. He has written about Litvinenko case. Right. You can find that in the internet. He has given that to a Swiss paper, and then it is in Russia Insider. You can find what he says, and it is quite interesting.
Sajjad Karim
is another man, too.
Sajjad
completely
Karim,
other case.
Listening to Donald Tusk, do you sense that this is a turning point of some kind where Europe will rally around Britain over this?
Well, Britain is, of course, a part of Europe and currently still a part of the European Union. So Donald Tusk has done absolutely the right thing in sending a very clear message of unity and solidarity. The European Union and Europe will stand as one. This is a direct attack on the soil of one of the member states of the European Union. And it's good to know that the United States of America stands in complete solidarity with the European Union in facing this challenge. And it's good to know that rather latterly, albeit delayed, that President Trump has also signalled the President's position on this. So we stand as a European Union completely unified in facing what is really a direct challenge upon a rules-based international system. We will face this challenge, and I believe that the direct indication given not only by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but echoed on a bilateral basis by EU states.
But how much, Sajjad Karim, can you count on your allies when you have elections in Italy where parties sympathetic to Russia have fared strongly, where you have both the French president and the German chancellor who want to get over the confrontation in Ukraine? How much will they stand by Britain over this?
Well, I have been speaking on France 24 on many an occasion where I have highlighted the basis upon which Russian interference in democratic systems throughout the European Union have come to light. Now, it's very clear what has happened so far as Brexit is concerned, and indeed those people who have been admirers of Putin have been completely silent in the last 36 hours or so, 48 hours or so since these matters have come to light. We know what Marine Marine Le Pen's position in France has been. We know the position of Holland. We know the position of the AfD in Germany, in Spain, what is happening, in Italy, in Austria, and indeed in some of the Eastern European countries as well. And we are only too aware of the way in which Russia is going to seek to try and attack the elections in the European Parliament itself that are due to take place fairly soon. We know what it is seeking to do, and therefore we absolutely must stand as one today in order to face these direct attacks upon our democratic systems.
Sajjad Karim, England won't be boycotting the World Cup by the sound of what Theresa May said. This despite prodding by the Daily Mail on its front page Tuesday. It said, how can we go to Putin's World Cup now? Should England be boycotting the World Cup?
Look, we cannot allow the Daily Mail to lead British foreign policy, and in particular when the European Union is standing completely unified. This is much bigger than the readership of the Daily Mail.
And your reaction to comments made by a Labour MP, Chris Bryant, critical of Manchester United manager Jose Mourinho for accepting a consultant's job with RT during that World Cup. Quote, to my mind, this is blood money paid directly from the Russian state coffers. Is Jose Mourinho accepting blood money?
Well, Manchester United is actually one of the football clubs in my constituency in the northwest of England. I hope they will take a particular view on this situation. It's quite clear that so far as Russia Today channel is concerned, and many of the contributors to it, people like George Galloway and indeed Nigel Farage, who has been closely associated with it, these are all people who are very much compromised.
All people who are very much compromised. Gordon Hahn, your thoughts on a possible shutdown by the British Broadcasting Authority, Ofcom, of RT. Would that be a wise move on the part of Britain?
Well, if they want to see BBC banned in Russia, then maybe it's a wise move. I would caution against jingoistic calls for unity across the Atlantic, and be a little suspicious about claims about what we know is going to happen in the European election, what the Russians are going to do, since we got things like Iraq, Ukraine, and many other things very, very wrong. So I would encourage even people who are sympathetic to Putin to speak out and say what they think, because the more voices, the better, and we can get to the truth. I'm against people trying to quash the opinion and the statements of people they disagree with, and that tendency is growing in the West. We wouldn't want to be imitating Russia now, would we?
And let's talk just a little bit, Gordon, about Vladimir Putin's day. While all was going on at the House of Commons, he was out campaigning in Crimea, which he annexed from Ukraine back in 2014, this ahead of his expected re-election Sunday. He was inspecting the completed road section of the Crimea Bridge over the Kerch Strait in the Black Sea. Gordon Hahn, that's going to remind folks of how popular a move it was, annexing Crimea. What do you think of the timing of what's going on in the UK ahead of this Russian election?
That's the right
question. It's a little suspicious to say the least. Again, we don't know the details of what happened here yet. We may find them out. I think Putin, generally speaking, in the presidential campaign, he's going to win about 70% of the vote. It's not a full and free fair election by any stretch of the imagination. One would like to see the Democratic candidates do better, and one would have liked to have seen Navalny, who was probably the leading Democratic opposition candidate, not call for a boycott of the election, because it's very important that even if the Democratic opposition were only to garner 10% by putting up a single candidate in the election. During this election, that would set them up for the mayoral election in Moscow later this year. And if you go back to the 2013, campaign very quickly, they almost forced the pro-Kremlin candidate into a runoff. So that would be a way to begin to undermine Putin through the Democratic movement.
All right, we'll see how what's going on in the UK will affect the vote on Sunday or not. Let's cross now, before we go, to London. Marina Litvinenko, the widow of murdered former Russian Secret Service agent Alexander Litvinenko, joins us. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24. What's your reaction to the measures announced by Theresa May?
I would say I was very grateful for what she said quite soon, almost just 1 week after it's all happened, because in our case we should wait this for more than 10 years before Theresa May released her statement. It means it's a very serious understanding what actually happened, and I believe it would be even very serious steps after that to prevent something similar might happen again in UK.
Before her announcement, were you among those who were critical of May? She was the Home Secretary when your husband was murdered.
You're absolutely right. And when Theresa May became Prime Minister, I believed she's a person who doesn't need more information about Mr. Putin, because all information and knowledge about this case was very important. I mean, case of death of my husband. But until now, UK and I believe other European countries try to save relationship between Russia and other countries. And I see how countries try very hard, but it doesn't look people from Russia really appreciate it. And everything what British government try to do, it looks just a softness and sometimes a weakness. And from other side, from this Russian government, they just decide if it's not be punished, they can do everything what they want.
Marina Litvinenko, some of the panelists wondering, is it not an order that came from the top in this instance, but perhaps rogue elements inside of Russia? Do you squarely blame Vladimir Putin for the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter?
No, I can't like to be so soon, because everything what we did in our case, and I hope it's going to be similar to Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Only thing is different. I wish Sergei Skripal and his daughter will survive, and I wish them all the best. Because in case of my husband, everything has happened only after his death. But to blame Mr. Putin straight, it may be a little bit premature. But we know this nerve agent was produced in Russia, what Theresa May says. And it's very important to understand. She will not say this without any serious evidence. And if this product was produced in Russia, it would be right thing from Russian government to cooperate and to say why, how it was possible to use this agent in another country. But behavior, what I would call, and attitude, what we saw in Russia, particularly in news programs and comments from very high level of Russian government, I think it's just not appropriate. It doesn't look, these people in Russia understand how is it serious what happened in UK.
Dmitry Dikochko, should the Russian media and spokespeople like the foreign ministry spokesperson who had very strong words on television Tuesday, should they have adopted perhaps a different tone?
They are as strong as the one of Theresa May. It's an answer, that's all. But, you know, the question is, what would be the interest of Russia to assassinate or to try to assassinate a person like that in Britain? Why? Just before elections?
No.
What is the interest? I mean, what they will have? What advantage can they have for that?
Marina Litvinenko, your thoughts?
It's again, when we talk about death of my husband, and particularly for what reason was to kill Sasha, what was a certain timing, I just understand people in the West really can't understand why these people from Russia might do this. And it's every time some logical way to understand. There's not any logic. And when we try to connect what happened to Sergei Skripal and to presidential election, it might be some link, but it might be not, because it's not any logic. And when people commit such a crime, it might be order making some years ago, because Putin himself comment in 2010 after Sergei Skripal and other people been swapped with another 10 agents from United States. Even it was already, Sergei Skripal was pardoned. I mean, he spent some time in prison, he was pardoned, he was swapped. It means what else? But for Putin, he was a prime minister in this time, he said, no, these people never ever forgiven. These people betrayed own country. And they need to be, not directly he said killed, but it was obvious what he meant. It's only death. It's a sentence for these people. And when it's happened, it doesn't matter. Again, we are living here in the West. We have some rules, and we think we need to follow these rules. But unfortunately, people who committed such a crime from Russia, they don't follow the same rules.
We're going to have to leave it there, but
I
want to thank you, Marina Litvinenko, for joining us from London. I want to thank Sajjad Karim for being with us from Strasbourg.
It's my pleasure.
Dmitry Dekochko, Gordon Hahn in Riga, and Michelle Carlin in Edinburgh. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.